Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'll be reviewing the TYR RD-1 Runner. So before I dive into my pros, cons, and the performance of this shoe, I do want to make something known that I am not an endurance-only athlete. I am a strength athlete that blends in athletic style training and runs with my training on a weekly basis. So generally I will cap my runs around 5 miles, and that's for durability purposes and just overall energy levels. So if you are somebody like a marathon focused athlete and you're trying to get a really good review on this shoe, for your context, I may not be the guy for that. I'm a strength athlete who likes to blend running into my work, and I want to make that known because if you're going to be watching my review, I want to make sure you have the full scope of how a model is tested and how I'm using that model. So that being said, 3 pros that I have with the RD-1 Runner is number 1, I have thoroughly enjoyed the performance of this shoe, and I see it as a really good shoe for recreational runners like myself. So if you are somebody who's an athlete and lifter, mostly on a weekly basis, but you do like to blend in some 5Ks, even some mile work, I see this as being a pretty viable option for your needs. I could also see this as being a good running shoe for beginners who are starting to up the mileage on a weekly basis that they are running. So I like the overall responsiveness that you get with the Surge Energy Foam midsole, and I feel like the outsole does a pretty good job of giving you a nice level of traction for indoor and outdoor runs. The second pro that I have with this shoe is the Surge Energy Foam midsole. So I was actually really curious to see how this shoe would feel when it comes to faster and slower runs, because the TYR CXT1 trainer there also features the Surge Energy Foam. Obviously it's much more dense, so I was curious, like, how would that midsole and that material translate to a running shoe that's gonna be a little bit less dense and a little bit more poppy with its feel. I like the midsole in this shoe. Even when doing faster models, the shoe felt pretty easy to wear, and even though it is a little bit thicker in regard to the midsole and how it kind of flares out, it never really felt overbearing. So I do like the midsole construction in this model, and I think as a first pass for a running shoe from TYR, this midsole should deliver a pretty strong performance for most runners with different needs. For fast runs and slow runs, I thought this midsole did a pretty good job for my training asks. The third pro that I have with the shoe, which is also a con, is the upper construction. So this model features an engineered mesh upper, and I love the upper for its comfort. It feels really good on the foot. This shoe does feel pretty easy to wear for longer durations and for longer walks, and I like it for its breathability. Now that does come at a con, and I'll talk about that in a second, but if you're looking for a shoe that is better for, I think, warmer weather wear or even treadmill running, this could be a viable option to look into. The midfoot and forefoot upper breathes pretty dang well, and even when wearing thicker socks, my feet did breathe pretty well in this shoe, which I personally liked, because if I don't always have thin no-show socks available, or I want to wear thicker socks to just prevent any blisters when breaking in a model, I liked that my foot remained relatively cool when wearing the shoe. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the RD-1 Runner. So 2 cons that I have with the TYR RD-1 Runner is, number 1, I do wish the toe box was a little bit wider. And so the base of the shoe, so the outsole and the midsole, do have a nice base to them. So I do think this could be a very viable running shoe for heavier set athletes who do need a little bit more base under them. However, the toe box regarding the upper is a little bit snug at times. I did feel my big toe feeling a little bit of rub here on my faster runs. Now that has broken in a little bit because we do have a toe guard here, and you will feel that, I think, when you're breaking them in. So it should get a little bit better if you do have wider feet. But do note that the toe box in this model isn't the widest, and if you need a wider toe box running shoe, this may not be the best option for you. I actually did a couple of runs in this model, and then I put toe separators on afterwards because I did feel like my toes were a little bit squeezed, and that was during the break-in process. So just food for thought before investing in the RD-1 Runner. The second con that I have with this shoe is the upper construction. So I mentioned that it has a really nice level of breathability. That is fantastic for warmer weather and indoor running. However, on some colder days here in Denver lately, I have found the shoe to run pretty cold, and no, it wasn't on the 0-degree weather we just went through. It was actually on one of the days before that where it was like 39 in the afternoon. I found my feet getting a little bit cold, and that was with slightly thicker socks. So if you want to buy this shoe for winter running, just keep in mind that it may not give you the warmth you want, especially if you're running outdoors and it's a little bit wet or even a little bit snowy and you're running through like some wetter terrain. You may get this upper soaked a little bit, and that could translate to your feet getting a little bit cool. So definitely food for thought, and just understanding that if you're going to invest in this shoe, it may not be the best winter-friendly running shoe on the market. But now let's chat on the performance of the RD-1 Runner. So when chatting on the performance of the TYR RD-1 Runner, thus far I've ran a couple of 5-mile runs in this shoe, multiple 5Ks, and I've used them for some speed work. So I ran a faster mile on the shoe, and I used them for some pickup style training. And overall, the running performance of this model has been pretty strong. And so for my slower pace runs, so some of my 5-mile runs and some of my slower 5Ks, I like the overall responsiveness and the cushion that you get from the midsole. So if you do like thicker cushion running shoes, I think you will enjoy this model. It almost kind of reminds me of how Hoka's feel at times. And I also like that the heel is a little bit beveled, because for me, when I'm running a little bit slower, I do have a little bit of a heel strike because I take longer strides. I like that because it does give me like a smooth transition with my stride. And also the 10mm heel toe drop in this model, I think should resonate with most folks, especially if you do like higher drops with your running shoes. When it comes to like more of my speed work, I also like this model, and for that style of training, I'm much more on my forefoot and much more forefoot biased with my stride, and this model has done a pretty good job. Now, it's not going to be the leanest shoe. It does kind of flare out a little bit, so if you're not a fan of running shoes that kind of have like that thicker midsole base, you might want to consider that, especially if you do want a running shoe for more speed focused training. But if you're going to be doing like a faster mile or even some pickup work, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for you. And I also like the outsole traction on the shoe. You get a nice level of tread. You have a 4mm thick grooved rubber outsole tread. And if you're using these outdoors, I think you should be pretty set for a while regarding durability. You do have some exposed foam here on the midfoot, but I don't think that's going to be the biggest deal. So I do see this as being a good like versatile running shoe for indoor and outdoor runs for different styles of running. Outside of the midsole and outsole in the shoe, I've also really enjoyed the upper for how it translates to running performance. I enjoy more breathable shoes. Granted, I'm not the biggest fan of them in the winter, obviously, as you could see from my complaining about the cold weather friendliness of the shoe, but for like treadmill running and in settings where it's a little bit hotter, I really enjoy the breathability of this model, and I like the comfort of the mesh. It feels thick enough to really lock down the foot, but then also light enough to still breathe, and I'm a big fan of that with running shoes. So at the end of the day, I think the TYR RD-1 Runner is a pretty good running shoe for beginners and recreational runners, and honestly, even if you are semi-serious with your running, you might also really resonate with this model as well. Now, is it going to be the best shoe for the professional endurance athlete? I cannot speak to that, but for more recreational running, for stuff that I do, I think this model will translate for most folks and give you a pretty comfortable ride for a variety of running styles. When it comes to the price of the TYR RD-1 Runner, you can expect to pay $129.99 USD. That is what I would describe as kind of like mid-tier for running shoes regarding price. It's pretty similar to the price of the Nike Pegasus. So I think if you're used to paying that for running shoes and you want to try out something new, then that price could be justified. I have yet to see any like glaring durability issues with this model too. So I think if you take good care of them and if you're just mindful of how you're wearing them and what climates you're wearing them in, I think they should last you a while as well for that price. All right, so now to answer the question, who should invest in the TYR RD-1 Runner? So if you're a recreational runner like me in nature and you're planning to use these for like a mile here and there, some 5Ks each week, and even some 5-mile runs, I have enjoyed this model. It almost reminds me of the Pegasus regarding its functionality. It's a very easy shoe to just kind of slap on and go for runs in, and it's pretty dang comfortable. I also like that it has supportive sidewalls here. It adds to the shoe stability, and it does have a slightly thicker base. So if you are somebody who does like slightly thicker midsole running shoes, then I also think you'll resonate with this model. Now, if you're somebody who wants a slightly more dense midsole or something that runs a little bit leaner or wider in the toe box, this model may not resonate with you. But again, I think if you're using these more recreationally in nature, or if you just want them for longer walks, I do see them as being a viable option. They're pretty dang comfortable and they have a nice level of responsiveness. So when it comes to the sizing and fit in the TYR RD-1 Runner, I think most runners and athletes should be safe going true to size in this model. So this model I think is going to resonate best with narrow and neutral width feet. If you have wide feet, I would say once again, tread lightly with this model. I'm not convinced you'll have enough room in the toe box, and even if you size up, I'm still not convinced you're gonna have enough room. So definitely consider that before investing. But if you have a narrow or neutral width foot, I think you'll be safe going true to size in the RD-1 Runner. So when chatting on the weight, heel to toe drop, and insole in the RD-1 Runner, for my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 11.35 ounces. The heel to toe drop on this model is 10mm, and this model does have a thin foam removable insole. All right, so when looking at the construction of the TYR RD-1 Runner, up here on the toe box, we have an extended outsole that wraps up, and then we also have an internal toe guard here that extends the entirety of the toe box. Once again, you'll likely feel this when you're breaking the shoe in, but it should subside as this material starts to get a little bit more malleable. Looking at the midsole in this model, we have the Surge Energy Foam that TYR uses in their shoes, and then we also have some supportive sidewalls here on the lateral and medial side of the shoe. So I do like that for giving you a little bit of additional midfoot support. So if you are somebody who does need that, you might like that with this model as well. Looking at the upper construction, we have an engineered mesh upper. It is 100% polyester, and we do have some nice breathability here in the forefoot and midfoot. We have some TYR branding here on the lateral medial side. To be quite honest here, I do wish this was a little bit less. It's a little bit loud at times, and I think with some of the colorways, this really pops. I chose this colorway because it's a little bit more subtle with the branding. And then looking at the midfoot here, we have 6 core eyelets that wrap up with a 7th back here for a lace lock. We do have a padded and gusseted tongue, and then we also have a loop on that tongue, and I have yet to have issues with the tongue security in this model. We have a heel counter back here, a pretty padded heel as well. I don't think you're gonna have issues with blistering in this model on the Achilles because this is pretty padded, so just food for thought there. That doesn't mean nobody will experience them, but I do like this feature for kind of preventing that, especially when breaking these in. And then looking at the outsole, we have a rubber tread patterning that extends pretty much the entirety of the shoe. There are areas where there is exposed foam, and that's why I would suggest not wearing the shoe when it's a little bit damper or dirtier outside, just to prevent any foam breakdown. And the outsole tread is this 4mm thick grooved rubber. So you do get a nice level of thickness with your tread here. So I do think this outsole should last you a while, especially if you're doing primarily outdoor running. This model, once again, has a removable insole, but that pretty much wraps up the gist of this model's construction. If you have additional questions about this model, drop a comment down below. All right, guys, that wraps up my review of the TYR RD-1 Runner. For my running needs, I thought this model has been a pretty strong shoe. As a first pass at a running shoe, I do like the RD-1 Runner. There are a couple of areas where I do think it could be improved, but for my needs, the shoe has done a pretty good job. Again, if you are a marathon runner or an endurance-only athlete, I am probably not the best reviewer to watch and get your feedback for this model, so definitely look around at other reviewers to see what they're saying on the shoe. But for folks like myself who are much more recreational with their running on a weekly basis, the TYR RD-1 Runner does feel like a pretty strong shoe. If you have additional questions on this model, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.